All right. Well, welcome, Niccolo. This is the first Qualia Structure Journal Club, where overall we are trying to understand and explore the Qualia Structure Research Project, which is basically trying to understand consciousness better by trying to understand the relationships between experiences themselves and the relationships between experiences and neural structures, or something along those lines. But exactly what the project's trying to do is, in fact, one of the things we're trying to work out ourselves. So essentially, the idea is to work through several different papers, and by doing so, come to a better idea of what this project is and what it is hoping to achieve. And just for some context, for anyone who might be listening to this later, so I'm the guy on the left there, Ariel, and I'm a neuroscientist, and Niccolo's the guy on the right there, and he's a philosopher. And we're going to go through these papers together, hopefully joined on later occasions by some other people as well. And the first paper, which we intend to talk through, is this paper, A Structural Constraint on the Neural Correlates of Consciousness by Sasha Fink, Lucas Cobb, and Holger Leyer, because it's a really good overview of many of the ideas that we're going to touch on. So let's get started. Niccolo,
cool.
I was planning on maybe giving a little short summary of the paper, but you can do that too if you would like, or I can.
Yeah, no, feel free. Yeah,
okay. So the overall premise of the paper is that what we want to do as philosophers and neuroscience studying consciousness is to identify what are the real neural correlates of consciousness. And by that, we mean a correlate of consciousness is any sort of brain activity or other physical thing that seems to change in a way that reliably indicates that some subject is, their conscious experience is changing in some way, shape, or form. It's some sort of physical, most often neural thing that is indicative of consciousness occurring, as opposed to unconscious brain activities like maintaining posture or blood pressure, or things that are required for conscious experiences, but at like a baseline level, but not for a specific experience. That's perhaps not the best description. We can hone in on what a neural correlate is in a minute. But the idea is they want to focus on the aspects of neural activity that aren't just merely correlated with conscious experience, but that have some sort of real deep metaphysical or explanatory connection to conscious experiences. And what they think the path to doing so is by noting the fact that when we have experiences, they don't seem to be all sort of isolated from each other. They seem to be able to be related to each other by their similarity or other sort of subjective relational measures. And they, through examining that, they motivate the idea of phenomenal holism, which is, I guess, the proposition that experiences in and of themselves in some metaphysical sense are determined by their relationships to each other. And then noting that, they think that this suggests a structural similarity constraint, which is that whatever the neural correlates of consciousness are, the relationships between them should somehow be constrained by the relationships between experiences, which they term a phenomenal structure. So basically, the neural correlates of consciousness should have this structural constraint that's a result of the phenomenal structure of experience. Do you think that's a fair summary?
Yeah. I think that's good. They actually start by distinguishing, right, the statistical NCC, the statistical neural correlates of consciousness, from the proper neural correlate of consciousness. I think there is a first issue that we might touch on, if you agree. So
yeah,
they say something like, I think something pretty uncontroversial, that statistical NCC are not that informative, right? Because you can find a spurious correlation among different things. So it might be interesting at a first level of analysis, but then when you go deeper, you realize that you might need something more, right?
Yeah.
And this something more, as they say, at least they seem to hint at the idea that this something more is a metaphysical relation between the neural level and the phenomenal level, right? So they present the statistical NCC, and they say this doesn't give us like a deep metaphysical picture of what's going on here. And at that moment, they say perhaps the NCC proper will solve that. And the first question that I would like to ask is whether the type of constraint they suggest on the NCC, so this type of structural constraint, is actually up to the task, is actually able to deliver a metaphysically robust view of the relation between the neural and the phenomenal, right? So I think when I read it, I don't know your view on this, but when I read it, I thought that there was a bit an ambiguity in the scope of the paper. So one possible scope is to give it this metaphysical view, right? That depends on how we think of the structural constraint between the neural and the phenomenal. But another view is just to say is the methodological reading, which is just let's use this constraint to do some research on the NCC, perhaps to find that level of analysis that is more informative for us, right? And that level of analysis will be the one that shows some sort of structural similarity between the structures of experience and the structure of the neural domain. And that's methodological though, right? So there's a difference in scope, and they say that they are more interested in the methodological one, but they also try to deal with the metaphysical issues there. So I found that part was a bit ambiguous, like in the term of the scope.
Yeah, I thought the same way, and I'm very worried about the question of what actually constitutes a good, I guess, claim to a metaphysical connection between some physical process and then some experience or qualia or whatever the thing is that we're trying to actually connect. I guess I feel like there's two different methodological approaches that are being talked about here. One is the neural correlates side. So maybe for some context, just to go over like traditional neural correlates research. So the idea is we know a lot of brain activity is just associated with what's often termed, I think, background conditions. So like a lot of stuff in the brain is just about maintaining posture and transmitting relevant information for autonomic processes, or doing low-level processing that's required for higher level processing that we suspect is actually involved in conscious experiences of things. So we're not, in the interest of studying consciousness, always interested in these background conditions. And so what we want to do is use paradigms like binocular rivalry or continuous flash suppression, or something where we present stimuli to an individual, a participant, a conscious subject, and we try and work out when they are experiencing something, or when they do have some particular phenomenal content, as opposed to when they don't have that content, and what brain activity tracks the change in content. And it doesn't track everything else, like all the basic processes and background conditions that are going on. And that's often done in a binary sense, as opposed to in a structural sense that they're talking about here. And they're interested in structure because they think it perhaps can do more explanatory work, I guess, in some sense. The other field of neuroscience that I think is relevant, and they do mention in the paper, and we might touch on in a later journal club, is the idea of representational geometry, which is the idea of you can look at how stimuli that you're showing to a participant are different, or how a participant's own description of their what they're currently experiencing differs, and the similarity relationship between things. And then you can look at the participant's brain states at the same time. And you can see how they might be looking at a set of different colors, and they describe a set of similarity relationships between the colors. And then their brain states are somehow different in a way that you can relate to each other. And then you can try and see if you can match between those two different things. But you can do this without even talking about consciousness at all. So you can talk about representational geometry between how these brain states are different, and how any sort of creature with a nervous system, or even an artificial intelligence system, has some sort of similarity between its internal states. And I guess the problem I have that's related to your point, Niccolo, is it's very easy to do representational geometry and say absolutely nothing about a metaphysical connection between what you're looking at and actual experience. And I also am very uncertain at what point we get to talk metaphysics instead of just neuroscientific examination of changes in states.
Totally. But that's why I think that the methodological point that they're trying to make is probably more interesting, at least depending where you come from. But if you're interested in the neuroscience of consciousness, you're interested in actually empirical research. I think that perhaps the focus on the methodological aspect of the paper is probably more interesting. But there are interesting questions related to the metaphysics of qualia and of experience that might come up in this debate as well. How do you feel about, let's start saying by saying this, then their project then, this structural constraint project, if you want, starts, I think, by individuating the structure of experience first, right?
Yeah.
Which is something which is the corresponding, I guess, part of figuring out whether the subject is conscious or not in the first paradigm that you mentioned, right? So I show you a stimulus, and I want to know whether you are conscious of the stimulus or not, right?
Yeah.
So that's the starting point in that type of paradigm. Well, in this type of paradigm, the first point is try to carve out the structure of your experience, right? Of the phenomenal domain, the structure of the phenomenal domain.
Yeah, well, I guess instead of just a sort of binary, is a participant experiencing some content or not, it's asking how do the different contents that a participant can experience relate to each other. That's the idea as I see it. Okay.
You still need to show some stimuli to the right. Just some stimuli.
I'm not sure you need to show stimuli. I mean, if you could do it with dreaming or hallucinating participants in a reliable way, then that could be done as well, I guess. I think, and they make the claim in I'm not sure if they make it in the main text or just in the notes below. They're not so concerned with the connection to the external world in the sense of how it tracks external stimuli, so much as they just want to see all the possible, or at least a subset of the possible contents that a subject can have, and then how those are related to each other through similarity or dissimilarity.
Cool. So that means that as a type of research program is compatible both with the report and non-report paradigms, I guess. That's an advantage that it might have.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, there's no reason why I can see, it shouldn't be compatible with any of those sorts of programs.
That's cool. That's cool. How do we find like the relevant domain in, at least in the let's talk about the phenomenal aspect here, the phenomenal level. How do we find the domain in which we should draw similarities? I guess that's the first question. So I think they mentioned something about typical modalities, like sensory modalities. So in the visual modalities, you might be able to draw similarity structure there. Then in the auditory modality, perhaps you can draw a similarity structure there. But a problem that I had with that is that even within one modality, so take the visual modality, which I guess is the most common one. There are, different types of visual experiences that you can have, right? You can see, I don't know, an abstract painting, you can see a bike, you can see the Melbourne skyline, These are different types of experiences, visual experiences. So they are part of one modality. But if you ask me, is the visual experience of seeing the Melbourne skyline more similar to the abstract painting or to the bike? I don't know. I wouldn't know how to answer, right?
Yeah.
So is there a problem like in how we define the domain?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it's, you have to make a lot of simplifying assumptions in order to get this to work. So I agree, when you consider a visual experience, like for natural scenes, there's a huge expanse of visual field, maybe like, depending on how you count it, like almost 200 degrees worth from side to side and like 100 degrees up and down. And then within those points, like there's colors and there's textures, but there's also like objects, and there's motion, and there's contextual effects where like what you see in one place is affected by all sorts of things. And then there's your memory of scenes you've seen before and how that changes things. So like it's very, very, very complicated. And there's no way we can go about like showing everyone all possible scenes that they could possibly see across their entire visual field, and then like getting similarity judgments on each of those over the entire set. Like it's way too big. And even conceptually, there's the question of if somebody's got their eyes closed and they just have a blank screen, like what the content of that is as well. So you have people like Andrew Horn and Giulio Tononi making the case that even just like a blank screen is like hugely rich, informative experience with lots of relations just in terms of the distance between points. So I guess that's to say that like vision is already extremely complicated before we even get to vision plus sound plus everything else. And you've got to make some simplifying assumptions, like it makes sense to talk about color in sort of an isolated sense where we're not talking about locations, where we're not talking about textures and objects, like that there's in a sense something to just study in the sense of like a very narrow domain of color or something else in that sense. But I guess you could question whether that's actually legitimate, because we always experience color right at a position of a particular object, that sort of thing. So
yeah, that's another problem, right? That we don't just experience like pure colors, like in void. But yeah, I guess you mentioned memory earlier, which is, I guess, it brings up another possible problem for this type of project, I guess, which is, look, we are interested in the similarity structure among experiences, right? So we are even in the color case, which is a fairly simple one, and they actually mentioned the paper, experimental paper by Brouwer and Niger, I think. I thought it was interesting. It was a very good thing to have in their paper, like a sort of empirical example of how this thing could work. I think that was very cool. So in the color case, we are interested in the structural similarity among color experiences. But when you ask subjects, is this color more similar to that color or to that color? How can you control the cognitive judgment? So here, perhaps something like memory, past experiences, different type of association that we can make in our heads, about colors. How can you track those possible cognitive confounds when you ask people, is this color more similar to that color? Because you are interested only in the phenomenal, right, aspect of color experience, not in the fact that yellow remind me of that experience, pink remind me of a similar experience. So I'm going to say that they are more similar, right? So how can you track that?
Yeah, it's a serious issue. I mean, this is related to my own research, and I know both in experiments I've run and also in papers that I've read that the exact way you ask participants to judge their comparisons can influence the results that you end up getting from them. I think there's a paper by Qasim and Zaidi from a couple of years ago where they asked people to judge the similarity between colors without first giving them any other instructions except just to judge how similar they were. And then later on, they got them to judge the similarity between colors, but they told them to think in terms of like color opponency processes. So like red and green being most different from each other and blue and yellow being most different from each other. And they get different results from their participants when they're prompted in that way. So it's certainly a problem when you consider the fact that these cognitive confounds can come into play. I guess the counter to it is that I guess intuitively it does feel like there's some stability and some level of intuitive correctness about like trying to judge how similar different things are. That doesn't seem to be, I guess it's not obvious that it's just learnt in a simple sense, or that in a way that's like very malleable and very dynamic. Which this isn't a particularly good argument, and I'm not sure which results I would point out to demonstrate it. But it does seem like I can slightly change my reporting style for like how similar colors are or how similar smells are or those sorts of things. But I don't know, there does seem to be something pretty stable to a lot of the similarities between my experiences. At least that's the claim I would make, that like maybe you could see if you like test a whole bunch of different participants from different cultures or in different ways, there would be some ways of doing it that would show a high level of within subject and between subject stability. And then maybe you'd feel confident that you were actually tracking phenomenal character rather than cognitive confounds.
Okay, so that's cool. So you were thinking of something like a massive report paradigm from all over the places and try to single out some sort of intersubjective stability.
Yeah, well, so one way, yeah, so I guess I'm starting with the premise that there is some sort of stability to the similarity relationships between experiences, and like I want to acknowledge
due to the phenomenal character.
Due to the phenomenal character. And I'm aware that like it does seem that maybe in small cases things can change. Like the classic example people give is the novice wine taster as opposed to the experienced wine taster, maybe genuinely having some difference in phenomenal character. And I agree that like there might be stuff that changes, but overall my guess is like the similarity between colors is pretty stable, or the similarity between temperature or other like less subtle aspects of phenomenal character are fairly stable, and that there would be ways to reliably get participants to give you data that agrees with that intuition. But I guess if it turns out that that's not true, I would become more skeptical of this line of research.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. When that's I think a positive aspect, right, of the project, that there is like at least a way to go forward and to possibly also falsify or somehow at least put pressure on the idea. So that's perhaps is an interesting point in favor of the project. So remaining close to this topic about colors, so they say something about the nature of color experiences, for example, that can be extended to any sort of experience. And I guess this is the core issue, the core claim of the phenomenal structuralism, that the nature of an experience, of a phenomenal character of an experience, is not given by a sort of intrinsic property of that experience, right, as Qualia theorists think, but it's given by the relation, right? It's due to the relation that that experience has with other experiences. So I was thinking about a possible thought experiment with Mary, right? The Mary case. So we can think of Mary in the black and white room, never experienced color in her life, and instead of giving her all the information about the physical world, as in the proper thought experiment, we actually show her colors, right? So we show her green, yellow, and let's say the complete range of colors, whatever that means. All the colors but red. Is the claim that Mary would be able to know what it is like to see red without actually seeing red, but just by seeing all the other colors? Is the claim that she would be able to see red because seeing red, like the experience of seeing red, just is the relation with other experiences?
Yeah, that's a good way of framing the question, I guess. So the idea is like, if you showed her orange and you showed her yellow and you showed her purple, and you were like, red is the thing that is like sits between those colors. Can you imagine that? Could she imagine red despite never having actually seen red before? This is kind of one of the key questions I'd like to explore across the series of this journal club. But I suspect that one would be committed to it. Like, it depends on like one's capacity to imagine, I guess. But the information would be there, I think, according to a phenomenal structuralist view.
Well, if it's a phenomenal structure, the information would be phenomenal information. So she would be able to actually experience it, right?
Yes.
We're not giving her information about like the structure of her brain or anything. We're just showing experiences. Like we're giving her like basically a repertoire of experiences. So I think the phenomenal structuralist should be committed to the view that Mary would be able to see red.
I agree.
Infer what it is like to see red, which is I mean it's cool, right? Because it is kind of counterintuitive, but it's also, I guess, what makes it interesting.
Yeah, I guess that has some implications for maybe a possible experimental design. I'd have to think of a not incredibly unethical way to do so. But I guess the idea is if you could find people who have not experienced something in any way, but you could somehow describe sufficiently how it was similar to other things that they have experienced, whether you'd be able to get them to imagine it like strongly and then show them the experience and ask if you got it right ahead of time. And maybe that would be supportive of the idea.
Yeah, perhaps. Well, I mean, that's kind of similar to learning, right? I mean, you made a point of the wine taster. That's kind of similar. Like, you've never experienced like this specific type of wine, right? And I guess you might easily find people who have never experienced a specific type of wine. And like, would you be able to know what it is like to taste that specific type of wine by experiencing other 500 types of wines? But I get okay, but now there is another another issue. This touches on another point, which is this, that and to be fair, Fink et al. In the paper do mention that they were clear on this point. They said that perhaps a Qualia realist, a Qualia theorist, might be happy to concede that experiences stand in a certain relation to each other, right? They might be happy to say that there is a phenomenal structure based on similarity of experience or anything like that. But they would deny that the structure is what fixes the character, the phenomenal character of a specific experience, right? So in the wine case, like in the experimental case that we're imagining, right? They might still say something like, yeah, sure, perhaps you would be able to imagine how it is like to taste that wine, because there is that structure there, right? But imagining how it is like, it won't be exactly the same thing as experiencing, like as it is like to taste that type of wine. Because to actually experiencing that, you need to enter that state if you want, right? You actually need to have that experience, right? But this is kind of interesting because it touches on one of the possible replies that people had to Jackson's experiment, the merit of the experiment, the relation between the experience, the actual experience, and imagining, right? That experience. So
can I just check my understanding there?
yeah.
So there are some people who are like very, very good at imagining experiences. I don't know how to phrase this in a philosophically accurate way. But there are, for example, there are some musicians who like are really good at playing music in their head, in a sense, to the point where it's basically as vivid as if they actually heard sound coming from somewhere. And let's say like we wanted to get them to imagine a tone that they like hadn't actually heard before or that wasn't playing somewhere. And let's say that like they claim that they can do this. Like you tell them, imagine a tone that's like 3.5 tones lower than some particular tone that you actually play for them. And they've never heard that tone before, but they can imagine it just fine. And they tell you that like, yeah, I can hear it now. Would the realist that you mentioned before make the claim that that would be sufficient to experience that tone, or that like somehow they'd still actually need to experience it through the stimulus being played?
No, I think a Qualia realist would say that there is a distinction in phenomenality. There is a phenomenological distinction between imagining at all and actually experiencing at all.
Okay. I don't want to get sidetracked too much on that, but I might think about that some more later and come back to it.
That would, yeah. That's yeah. I don't know if you can actually empirically test that, but
yeah,
it would be definitely cool. Yeah, at least to think of the various implications, right? That's nice. That's nice. So yeah. Well. Oh yeah, there is another thing that they mentioned in the paper. And I actually I struggled a bit with that, which is the idea of homomorphism versus isomorphism when trying to find a relation between the neural and the phenomenon, right? So let's say that we have figured out like a phenomenal structure based on similarity, and then we have figured out how the neural structure is. And then the question is there like a one-to-one mapping, or is it many-to-one mapping, right? So I think they say something like it must be like you must there must be the possibility that one experience can be mapped onto different neural structures, right? Because of the multiple realizability, you have degeneracy, you know, plasticity and stuff like that. So you need to leave that open. And I think that's fine. But I guess the question is how different can the neural structure, can these different neural structures be before becoming completely uninformative with respect to the experience that we are targeting, right? So do you see the problem?
Maybe let me try and see if I understand the question. So there's the issue where it's possible to imagine that different neural configurations or different physical states could all be connected to the same phenomenal experience, and that there's a many-to-one mapping between different possible physical states and different experiences. And this is the notion of multiple realizability, which is the idea that, as an example, like we could slightly change the states of neurons, or we could slightly change the atoms that are inside them, or the ion channels, or any of these sorts of things without necessarily changing the experience that a participant or a subject was having. And your question is there a problem when, yeah, maybe I'm not, try again. What exactly is the problem?
The problem is that when you want to go back and you want, you do your decoding and you want to infer the phenomenal state by looking at the neural structure, right? If there is a one-to-many mapping, right? You don't know what the subject is experiencing, and you, for some reason, you single out this neural structure that has no real similarity. You can't grasp any similarity with the known neural structures that you know might be associated with that type of experience, right? How informative could that structure be? Could actually allow for the inference that that subject is actually experiencing, I don't know, the relation between red and blue, or perhaps there's something else going on and the subject is actually not experiencing the relation between red and blue, and that's why the structure is so different, although the subject is reporting that the subject is seeing that type of similarity relation between the two colors, right? So
let me just check again. Is the question what happens if we have a discrepancy between subjective reports and the neural structures that we're detecting, and what we think should be going on based on phenomenal structures that we've previously recorded or have some theoretical reason to believe should be the case? Is that your question?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I don't know, if someone maps your phenomenal structure into a neural structure, finds a structure, then they map my phenomenal structure into the neural structure, and they can see that my neural structure is somehow similar to yours, right? When we say that we are experiencing certain colors, right? And then you have a third subject, and they say that they are experiencing the same colors that we are experiencing, but their neural structure is completely different than ours, right? And what should we infer there? How informative is that neural structure, right?
Yeah, I guess it's the question, as always, of what's the ground truth that we want to be relying on. This seems very similar to the functionalist and causal structure debates that people have in IIT, where if we agree ahead of time that I'm conscious and you, Niccolo, is conscious and this other person is conscious and we all have pretty much the same experiences, then yeah, we've got a problem if the phenomenal structures and the neural structures don't line up between the three of us. If we're not as committed to that, I guess we can perhaps get to the state where if the phenomenal structures don't line up, or if the phenomenal structures, well, I guess there's two possibilities. There's one that the phenomenal structures don't line up between the three of us, in which case phenomenal structuralism, I guess, would say that yeah, we may well all be having different experiences. I think the case they make, for example, is that maybe people who are colorblind actually, they don't just differ in their color experiences with respect to the colors that they're colorblind to, but they differ in their experiences possibly with respect to all colors as a result. But then there's also the possibility that we all report the same phenomenal structure, but with different neural structures, like neural similarities. And I guess the response there would be that we'd probably found the wrong neural structure and we had to go looking for something else that still matched for all three of us. Am I getting to the answer to your question, or I feel like I might be missing the point still?
Yeah. No, I think that helps. The problem is that like a critic might say something like, well, this kind of turns the project into some sort of, you know, unfalsifiable, or at least not particularly informative, right? Like, or at least, you know, to make an informative claim, you should tell me beforehand the level of analysis at which the similarity structure should be found, right?
Yeah.
So, to stop that type of response, right?
Well, would that be a criticism then of, for example, a theory like integrated information theory or IIT, where it sort of is related to what we're talking about, in that in IIT, there's the claim that there should be some integrated information which has these maximally irreducible conceptual structures, or whatever they're going to be called in IIT4, that has some sort of relationships that are identifiable with some sort of neural structure or thing derived from neural structure, but they don't make the claim that it's any particular neural structure or any particular abstraction derived from neural structure. They make the claim that it is the one that maximizes integrated information. Would that be a problem? Are you saying that they should have to pre-commit to a particular level, or is that a sufficient?
Well, I mean, if you want to go back, yes, as I said, if you want to actually do science and go back from either the neural level, I guess in IIT would be the level of the informational level of the Q shape, if you the Qualia shape, if you want, because that would correspond to the experience. So you need to justify, if you want, to justify the idea that that particular Q shape or that particular neural structure, in the case of Fink et al., is informative or with respect to the phenomenal experience that the subject is actually enjoying, right? So, because otherwise, I mean, this is kind of similar to the point that they make about the relation between phenomenal structuralism and meaning holism in philosophy of mind and philosophy of language, right? The idea that the meaning is just the meaning of a representation, or a mental representation, or just of a symbol like, you know, dog, is given by the relation, the inferential relation that it has with other concepts, other representations, right? And they say something like, one of the traditional objections to that, to meaning holism, is that if you have a conceptual network that is different than mine, when you say dog, you mean something different than what I mean when I say dog, right? Because the meaning of dog is fixed by the relation and not by, you know, any causal interaction with an actual dog. And they say that might be an objection to the meaning holism, but it is not an objection to the phenomenal holism and phenomenal structuralism, because, you know, because consciousness is private and we should expect right, individual differences, right, in our way of experiencing the world and so on. But I still see a problem there, because I can accept that there are individual differences at the phenomenal level and for sure at the neural level and so on. But when you say that you're experiencing a certain color and a certain relation between colors, there must be like a significant similarity between different subjects. Otherwise, you cannot go back from the decoding of neural structures to the experience, right? If there is no stability across different subjects, the project is not meaningful, right? That's what I'm saying. And that is similar for IIT too, right? If you know, the Q shape that you have when you experience a cup is completely different than the Q shape that I have when I experience a cup, and completely different from when other people Q shape when I experience a cup. Then you can't go back from the Q shape to the experience, right? There must be something to ground that type of inference.
Yeah, I would agree. For me, I guess one of the constraints and aims of the project, like the Qualia structure research project overall, would be to get a bunch of subjects who you agreed ahead of time were conscious and had conscious experiences and contents that were at least somewhat relatable to each other. There was some degree of intersubjective comparison. And then once you established what their phenomenal structures were of the individuals and maybe some sort of inter-individual phenomenal structure, or at least how things can vary, then you would go looking for some sort of physical structure which matched up with that in the brains of all of these different subjects that you already agreed ahead of time. So I guess the idea would be that the phenomenal structure would constrain what you would think was an appropriate neural correlate that you ended up finding in their brains. That's the structural similarity constraint that Fink et al. Talk about. And I guess if what you found was that it was really not possible to develop some sort of reliable intersubjective phenomenal structure, you'd certainly be in trouble straight away. And then if you could do that, but you couldn't find any reliable neural correlate, you'd also be in trouble at that point. But if you could find some both reliable intersubjective phenomenal structure and reliable intersubjective neural structure, then I think that would be a strong, it would be strong support, I guess, for the intuitiveness of the project. Although I guess you'd still have all the problems of like, how do you actually make the metaphysical connection at the end, which is what we were talking about earlier, where you wouldn't have proved the realists wrong. You would just be bolstering the intuitive case for this sort of claim.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. But that's not necessarily a problem. That's what I say, right? It depends on the scope. Depends on the scope of the project. I think that, for example, that example with the Brouwer et al. Paper, right? When they say, look, they found a structure in the color experiences, right? And then they mapped the structure to different parts of the brain, like V1, MT, V4, and they show that, if I remember correctly, V4 was the area when you actually can find like a structure in the neural states that maps into the phenomenal structure of color experiences, right? So that's how the structural constraint on NCC should work, right? You try to map that structure into different parts of the brain. You see that part of the brain that actually is homomorphic, like structure preserving, with respect to the phenomenal one, is your NCC, something like that, right? I think that is totally fine, and I think that's a very cool project, right? Of course, as we said earlier, the Qualia realist might always say something like, yeah, cool, of course, there is the structure, that there is a structure between experiences, and it's, there might be some sort of psychophysical bridges between the phenomenal and the neural, that mapping that phenomenal structure into the neural structure, but that doesn't mean that the experience of seeing red is given by its relation with other experiences, right? It's not an implication, if you will, of the view. In philosophy, sometimes there is this distinction between in the explanatory gap case, right? Why does some particular physical activity feels like something, right? It can be cashed out in terms of absolute gap and comparative gap. So the absolute gap is this, like why there is something overall. After all, the comparative gap is why this particular experience doesn't feel like that particular experience, right? So perhaps the Qualia structuralist might have something to say about the comparative gap, right? So the experience of seeing orange feels like orange, so more similar to red than green or something like that, because it stands in this particular relation, right? This particular structure. You might say something about that, but you're not really explaining why it feels like orange to begin with.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would say that at least a worry for me as well is I think not only could the phenomenal holist and the qualia realist in an intrinsic sense agree here, but the eliminativists could also agree that there was like their view was totally in line with this sort of subjective, psychophysical, and neuroscientific data, where they would just say, yeah, you've given a great explanation for like how it is that different brain states, like the relationships between brain states and how that leads to people providing reports of similarity. But why do we need to talk about conscious experiences here either? You've just explained the similarity reports.
Right.
And that also
Absolutely.
seems like a problem for people who espouse the view that like there is some what is it like to be explained at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, again, it depends on what we think that this project is doing, really.
Yeah.
If we think that it's just like a sort of methodological way to try to define the most informative level of analysis when we're trying to find an NCC, I think that's fine, and that's something like novel and original, which is good. The metaphysical questions remain open, but that's totally fine. I don't think that's that's a major problem.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the impression I'm getting as I do this research for longer and longer, is that the real aim is to end up with better and better neural correlates. And the hope is that somewhere along the way, something will click and we'll be able to make some stronger metaphysical claims. But I don't think anyone's got any definitive proofs that that'll actually happen. It's more a hope than it is a guarantee.
Yeah. And perhaps you can justify your metaphysical claims with some sort of inference to the best explanation type of,
Yeah, exactly.
if that's a possibility. Metaphysicians debate on that too, but we will not enter the debate. But yeah. Anyway, it's almost 3 p.m.
Yeah, I'll stop the recording.
Okay.